All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Thursday, September 10th, 2020. Our quote for the week here in 7th grade social studies is from Mark Twain. It says, "The man who does not read books has no advantage over the one who cannot read them." And what that means, basically, even if you know how to read, if you don't read, you're no better than anyone that can't read, or you're not going to know more than them, is what he was saying there. So good little piece of info. So let's use that knowledge and those skills that we have and push them to our potential. All right, so our standard today is 7.01. We're going to identify and locate the geographic features of East Asia, including China, the Gobi Desert, the Himalayan Mountains, Japan, the Korean Peninsula, the Yangtze River, the Yellow River, the Pacific Ocean, and the Plateau of Tibet, and then the Sea of Japan. So in short, you are going to identify and locate the geographic features of East Asia. Alright, so our agenda today, we're going to go over our do now first. You should complete that first. Then I also have some videos here that you can copy and paste, or pause the video and go to those. We have a short video on the geography of Asia and the Pacific. Then we're going to do 2 map activities here. Alright, we're going to do one over, make sure we know our continents and oceans and know where Asia is before we actually start talking about the different places within Asia that we need to know for our standard. Then we're going to do one on Asia. We're going to identify some features in Asia. We got one more short video we're going to watch to kind of show us where some of these features are. And then we're going to do a map activity over the geographical features of China that we need to know about, like the Yangtze River and the Yellow River and the Himalayan Mountains and the Plateau of Tibet and so on. All right, and then you will need to watch Mr. Zoller's podcast. All right, and here's the link to that. And in that you will complete the podcast video questions. It's kind of a guided notes document. And then you also have a reading activity over the geography of China that you will do. And then we have our exit ticket as well. All right, so let's go ahead and start it, and let's look at our do now today. All right, so give me 1 second. What do you need? I'm doing my video recording. I can't pause it. I'll work.
Guess that's all yours. Nope.
I'm doing my recording. You're fine. That's for me then when I get done. Y'all are awesome.
Well, for some reason they came to us. And then,
We get forgotten all the time.
well, they told us today, instead of us handing them out, to just bring them to the next teacher can take their stuff and pass them on to the next one.
Okay.
But
You want me to dig through it?
you're busy.
You sure? You can leave it for me. I can dig through it, get it out, and pass it on to the next person.
Right now.
Okay.
Except trying to avoid my phone call
You
or
can,
my
you
phone.
you can listen to my lesson.
All my phone's on.
If you need me, just holler at me. But I don't mind digging through it if you want me to do it.
You are busy, I'm not, so.
All right, hopefully you had a chance to read this document here. Let's go ahead and talk about our questions. So what you need to do, you need to use textual evidence when answering your questions here. So if you want to highlight or underline, you can do that. But our first question, describe the location of China. You should have seen that China is located in Southeast Asia along the coastline of the Pacific Ocean. All right, so if you wanted to you need to put it in your own words too, okay? We don't want to plagiarize. So you need to make sure that you could say China is in Southeast Asia next to the Pacific Ocean. All right, number 2, name China's 2 major rivers. All right, you should have seen here that we have the Yangtze River, and then we also have the Yellow River as well. All right, so these 2 rivers are very important to China civilization. The Yangtze River is the longest river in Asia, the 3rd longest in the world. And then we have the Yellow River, which is the 2nd longest river in Asia. And we call the Yellow River because it's actually kind of a yellow color from the sand that blows into it from the desert. All right, and remember that when we're trying to find it on a map. So you'll know that the Yellow River is close to a desert. All right, number 3. Describe and define the Himalayas. All right, so you should see here that the Himalayas, as it says, is a mountain range in Asia separating the plains of the Indian subcontinent from the Tibetan Plateau, and that the Himalayan range is home of the planet's highest peaks, including the highest, Mount Everest. All right, so I'm going to highlight that there. Okay, and so what I can do here, I need to put this in my own words. So what I might say is, the Himalayas are mountains in Asia, and they are the tallest mountains in the world. Okay, there you go. Now let's go ahead and let's watch a video real quick. I want to kind of give you a visual of some of the places that we're going to be talking about today. So let's go over here to watch this little video. This part of this video about Asia and the Pacific. That's the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. All right, we're going to stop right there. So I just want to kind of give you all a visual of some of the places that we're going to be identifying on our maps today. So if you look here, you know, we are just focusing on East Asia. So our objective and our standard tells us to identify and locate the geographical features of East Asia. So we're going to take a look at those areas that I just talked about at the end of that video here. But before we get into that, let's make sure that we understand where exactly in the world Asia is. All right, so we'll take a look here. You have an activity that looks like this here that I've printed off for you. And I've also given you some maps that you can use, and you can Google this as well. But we have some world maps here that can help us with finding these features. Okay, we got to do the research. We got to look for them if we don't know where they are. So I'm probably just going to use this map here. It seems to work out pretty good for us. So let's take a look at our activity here. All right. So let's just go through that. So the first one and the most important one we need to know about is Asia. But before we find out, let's find some things that we might not know already. So let's look for the Arctic Ocean here. So I'll go to my map. I'm gonna look here, and I'm looking. Okay, I know it's the oceans. It's probably in the blue. Oh, there it is, right up here up top, right here. It's the Arctic Ocean. So I'm gonna go to my map. Where's that? That's number 7. Okay, so I'm gonna put right here, number 7. Okay. Now let's try and find Antarctica right here. So let's go to my map here. Antarctica is a continent, so we're looking for a body of land. Okay. All right, there it is, right there at the bottom, Antarctica. All right, so let's put that there. That's represented right here, number 8. Okay. All right. Now let me do one more with you. Okay. So let's do the Indian Ocean. Now, if you know where India is, that's the easiest way to find it because it's the Indian Ocean. It's right below that country there. So let's look for that here now. There's India right here. All right, the ocean's opposite body of water, so it's going to be blue. There it is, Indian Ocean, right to the east of Africa, to the west of Australia, and south of Asia. So let's find that. All right, right here, number 9 will be our Indian Ocean. I'm going to write in number 9 right here. All right, now let's, so we live in North America, so I'm going to give you a chance. Can you find for me North America? Look for the map. And pause it here. All right, so go back to our map here. So which one represents North America? That's where we live. You're absolutely right. It is number 11. All right, so if you remember our directions, okay, you usually have a compass on your maps. Okay, so usually up is north. Okay, if you go down on the map, it's south. To the left is east. Okay, and to the right is east, and then to the left is west. Okay, so this is North America. Which one do you think is South America on this map? Very good. It is number 10. Awesome. All right. So there's 2 oceans that touch North America and South America. You have the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. All right, and the Pacific Ocean actually goes over to Asia as well. Remember, the world is round, so you got to kind of wrap this map together so you can kind of have that picture in your head. But let's go back to our map. See if you can find the Pacific Ocean. Look at that real quick. Find it? Okay, great. Now let's go back to our map here. So which one of these is the Pacific Ocean? If you said 2, then you are right. All right. So I said there are 2 oceans that touch the Atlantic or touch the North American and South American continents, the Pacific and the Atlantic. We've already identified as this being the Pacific, so that would make number 4 which one? That's right, the Atlantic Ocean. All right, now let's do our other continents here. So let's give you just a second. I want you to try and find Africa, Australia, Asia, and Europe. map and see if we can find those here. Africa, Australia, Asia, and Europe. All right, let's come back here to our map here. Now, so which one of these is Asia? That's right, number 5. Which one is Australia? Very good, number 3. How about Europe? That's right, number 6. So therefore, Africa must be, you said it, number 1. All right, now let's take a closer look. So we are focusing on Asia right here, and in particular, East Asia, this area of the world right here. Okay, so let's take a look at that map. All right, so we got 5 features here we need to identify. So real quickly, I want you to go ahead and take a look at this map here that I've given you, called the Sea of Japan map right here. Go ahead and take a look at that and try and find those features. If you need to go back and rewind, you can. You can pause this video here to do that. And we're back. All right, so China, which one is China? Did you say China? You're right, that is number 1 right here. This is China right here. All right, but what about the Pacific Ocean? So what's the big body of water in here? That's right, it's number 5 is the Pacific Ocean. How about Japan? Now Japan is a country, it's a piece of land, and it is several islands. That's good, that's right, that's number 4. And then we have the Sea of Japan. So what's that body of water probably right next to Japan? That's right, Sea of Japan is number 3. All right, and then finally we have the Korean Peninsula, which is number 2, which brings us to our first word of the day, and that is peninsula. See if you can look up the definition of a peninsula. What is that? All right, you're right. It is a body of land surrounded by water on 3 sides. So it's not almost an island. It's almost an island, but it's still connected to the mainland. So if we look here, let me draw you kind of what Florida looks like. So here's the southeastern United States here. This is what Florida kind of looks like here. All right, so Florida is surrounded by water on 3 sides. Got the Gulf of Mexico, and it comes around. Here's the Atlantic Ocean. So Florida is a peninsula. This area right here is a peninsula. Notice it's still connected to the mainland, but it has water on 3 sides. All right, now let's we're gonna watch one more video, but next we're gonna take a look closer into China here and look at the geographical features that we need to know about in here. So we're gonna watch a quick video real quick about those geographical features before we identify them. I'm sorry, it's taking longer than I thought it would be. Don't be mad at me.
I'm not. I can't say what I was going to say.
What were you going to say? I'm on mute. Oh. All right. So now we've seen some of those in person. Let's go to our last map activity to find our last, to identify and locate, as our standard says, the geographical features of East Asia. Take a little closer look here. So, using your maps, especially this map that I've given you here, this one here probably help you identify the most, along with this map as well. So you can pause this video right here to study this map if you need to. Okay, let me put the other one up here. Now you can pause the video here as well to study this one. All right, now we're back here. All right, so after you hopefully study those other maps, let's identify these features here on the map. So let's go here. So let's find first the Pacific Ocean. All right, you're absolutely right. That is the letter represented by F here. All right, what about the Himalayan Mountains? You are correct. It's the letter A. Good job. All right, what about the Tibetan Plateau? Very good. That is the letter B right here. The plateau. Now that's our next word. A plateau is a high, flat plain. So usually kind of on the edge of mountains. So say we got our mountains here. All right, and then usually kind of at the edge of those mountains, there's kind of a raised area of flat land before the mountains go down. And this right here, this high, flat land is your plateau. All right, very good. All right, so the Gobi Desert. That's right, letter E. All right, what about the Yellow River? Remember I said the Yellow River is yellow because it's close to the desert. That's right, you're absolutely right. They're represented by the letter D. And we have the Yangtze River, letter C. The Japanese Sea is G. And the Korean Peninsula, H. Very good, very good. All right, now, the last thing that you need to do is fill out our exit ticket. Okay, so just using based on our knowledge from today. So your exit ticket here, show you what it looks like just to make sure you're on the right one for today. Right here. So you need to identify these features on this map here. All right. And then after that, your homework for today is you are going to watch a video and answer the questions. I'm going to play that video for you on here at the very end. But you also have a reading activity that you need to do. You're going to do it just like you would do now. You're going to read the text. You're going to highlight textual evidence that helps you answer those questions. And answer the questions below in your own words using complete sentences. So, first question, for example, can you name the geographical features that is sometimes called the cradle of Chinese civilization? So I'm going to go up here to the top, and as I'm reading, I see under here, under the Yellow River section, it says the Yellow River is often called the cradle of Chinese civilization. So I see that's my answer right there. So I'll highlight that. If I want to put it in my own words a little bit here, so I'm going to put right here, I'm going to write Yellow River is sometimes called the cradle of Chinese civilization. All right, that's how you're going to do that. Try and put it in your own words if you can. I understand if you can't sometimes, like I couldn't. That time, someone's put in quotations here, knowing that I got it directly from the text. Right, so I'm going to play that last video for you. The video questions, they look like this here. Let me pull those up for you. So as you go along, you can just pause the video where you need in, and he answers it word for word. So he'll say, where in the world is China? Okay, you simply just pause the video there after he gives you that answer. So you'll see that he says China is in Eastern Asia. All right, so that's how you do it. So I'm gonna play that video for y'all real quick.
Greetings, students, and welcome to this edition of Mr. Zoller's Social Studies Podcast. On today's edition, we're going to be talking a little bit about the geography of China. And when talking about Chinese geography, the most important question to ask is, where in the world is China? Well, look at this map and identify the location of China. China is located in Eastern Asia. Now, let me pause for a second, because when we go through these podcasts, I want to give you a pointer here on how that you can use them best. If you want to take any of this information and write it down in your notes, all you need to do is pause the podcast, record the information, for example, in this case, the location of China, and then, when you're ready, simply unpause the video and we'll go on. Let's try that right now. Go ahead and pause the video. And we're back. All right. Now that we've talked about the location of China, let's see if we can understand exactly why that location is so important. There are two important geographic factors that limited China's contact with outsiders. One example of this would be long distances. Quite simply, because of China's location in Eastern Asia, they were just simply very far away from other contemporary civilizations in the world at that time. But there's another geographic factor at work here as well, and that is natural barriers. China is surrounded by a series of imposing natural barriers that makes it very difficult for people to come into or out of China. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. The first natural barrier that I want to talk about is the Tibetan Plateau. Go ahead and write that down. Now, in order to understand why the Tibetan Plateau is such an imposing barrier, we first need to make sure that we understand exactly what a plateau is. Do you remember your geographic terms? A plateau is a mostly level expanse of land that is at a very high elevation. Let me give you a photo of what I'm talking about. This is the city of Lhasa, which is the capital city of Tibet. But what I want you to notice here in the background is that we do have mountains. We do have some elevation within the plateau. A plateau itself is not necessarily entirely flat. There'll still be peaks and valleys. But what I want you to understand is the entire landscape itself is raised to a very high elevation. That's why plateaus can be challenging natural barriers to cross. Let me give you another example of a natural barrier. We also see the Himalayan Mountains forming part of the natural border of China. Now, when we're talking about the Himalayan Mountains, then you got to remember that that is the largest mountain range in the world. Take a look at a photo here of one of these particular mountains. By the way, do you have an idea of exactly what mountain we must be looking at here? That's right. That is a picture of Mount Everest, all 29,000 plus feet of Mount Everest. So that gives you a good idea of exactly how challenging it would be to try to enter China by crossing over the Himalayan mountains. Here's another imposing natural barrier. The Gobi Desert forms part of the natural border of China between China and what is today Mongolia. Now, why is the Gobi Desert such an imposing natural barrier? Well, what you have to remember is, even though it's relatively flat, like we see in this picture, deserts are areas that get very little rainfall. In fact, they get less than 10 inches of rain per year. What that means is there's not going to be a lot of available sources of water, not a lot of rivers or streams, not a lot of natural rain pools that collect. So it's going to be difficult to cross over this desert, certainly for a small group, but especially for a large army to try to enter China from that direction. The last natural barrier that I want to talk to you about today is a natural barrier to the east. And if you look at the map, you can tell that we have the Pacific Ocean then located to the east as well. All right, so let's pause for a second and look at this from a different perspective. Specifically, what we're doing is looking down on Asia. This is a composite satellite map of Asia. So we've got China over here. Down here in the corner, that's the beginning of the Peninsula of India that we see. And what I'd like to do is see if, based on what we have discussed, if you can identify these various natural barriers here of China. Well, let's start with our first one. Take a look at the color, first of all. That'll give you a clue. Notice we don't see the deep greens like what we see in some of the regions in eastern China. We don't see a lot of speckling or anything indicating that probably that terrain is relatively flat. If you guessed that this was the Gobi Desert, you would be correct. Now look down here to the southwest. What you'll see there is kind of a line, and on one side you see some more browns. On the other, you see some deeper greens. But right along that ridge there, you notice that we have some speckling of white. Well, that white that we're looking at is actually snow. So this natural barrier is, that's right, you guessed it, these are the Himalayan Mountains. That's snow on the top of those mountains that we can see even in this satellite image, which is pretty neat. Now look at this natural barrier. Here you notice that we've got a little bit more rugged landscape, some variation in the color tells us that. So this is the Tibetan Plateau. Now, of course, to the east, we have the Pacific Ocean, but what I'd like you to really focus on is these three natural barriers to the west. If you line those up, you'll notice that we create essentially a natural wall. And that natural wall is going to make it very difficult for people to come into China or to leave China. Now, let's stop and talk about the effects of that. How do you suppose this geography is going to influence the way that China develops? You probably could be able to identify that this is really a mixed effect. There are some ways that this geography will help China, but there are also some ways that it will hurt China. I want to see if you can identify some examples of this. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and write down your answers to this question. Then when you're ready, unpause the video and we'll talk about what you've decided. All right, let's see what you were able to come up with. First of all, how did these natural barriers help China in their development? Probably you said something along the lines of there would be fewer invasions of China. If you take the Gobi Desert, for example, it's already difficult to cross the Gobi Desert as it is, but can you imagine trying to march an entire army across the Gobi Desert with no sources of water? The same thing certainly would be true of the Himalayan Mountains. It's going to be very difficult. We're going to see very few examples of armies coming in from outside China and attempting to conquer them. So that certainly is helpful to China. It's going to allow them to develop unopposed, so to speak. But how do you suppose we might see some negative effects coming out of these natural barriers? Well, you probably said something along the lines of there would be less trade. If it's difficult for armies to come in and out, it's going to be difficult for merchants to come in and out. But let's pause here for a second because I want to make sure that we understand exactly what it is that we're discussing. Is it reasonable for us to say that long distances prevented all trade between China and other ancient civilizations? Of course not. It's not going to prevent all trade. But what we might say is it's going to make trade more difficult. We're going to see it be more difficult for merchants to bring goods in and out of China. It's going to be difficult for ideas to travel in and out of China as a result of these natural barriers. All right, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the rivers of China. There are two rivers that I'm going to want you to know. One is called the Huanghe River, and the other is called the Yangtze River. Now, what we see happening in China is a tendency by these rivers to flood, and that does two different things. On the one hand, it deposits fertile soil on the land around it after it floods. But, of course, there's the destruction that's caused by the floods. So what we see here is, again, a mixed effect from these geographic features. Does this sound familiar to you, by the way? Does this sound like any other civilization that you've studied before? Now, you might come up with several different examples, but probably the most famous example that we know of a river that floods, but as a result of the flood allows the civilization to exist there would be, how about Egypt? Let's look at another satellite image. Here's a satellite image looking down on Egypt, and you can clearly see the location of the Nile River. Because along the Nile River, we see green area. That's area that's been irrigated by the waters of the Nile River. And that farming wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the Nile River. How do I know that? Well, look at the area that surrounds the Nile River. Around it, all we see is vast open desert. But near the Nile River, we see lush green farmland. We see something similar happening in China as well. Let's go back to China and talk a little bit about the Huanghe River, which has a very ominous nickname. It is sometimes called the River of Sorrows. Now, where do you suppose it's going to get a name like the River of Sorrows? Well, of course, that comes from the destructive flooding. When it floods, it levels crops and houses. So then you might ask, well, then why would people continue to live near this river? Why wouldn't they live farther away from the river so that they didn't experience all these negative effects? Well, the reason is because by living near the river, they can take advantage of the fertile soil that's deposited. There are a lot of crops, like, for example, rice, that thrive in this sort of environment. So let's talk about that fertile soil for a second. There's a name for this yellow soil that blows off of areas like the Gobi Desert. It gets picked up into the waters of the river, and then when the rivers flood, and then they recede again afterwards, they leave behind this yellow soil. This is known as loess. Go ahead and write that down. Loess is that yellow soil that is brought by the floods. And this is why we see these farmers continuing to live on the banks of these rivers. Well, that's it for today's podcast. I hope you have enjoyed it, and keep studying the social studies.